Okay. Hello. Hi. Welcome to Connect with Adult Ed, the NMEA podcast. I'm your host, Nadia Kader, and I'm joined by the TSTM Essentials team to talk about what's going on with TSTM in New Mexico. I'm, of course, also joined by my producer, the producer of the show, Jamie.
Hi.
So everyone knows Jamie. You guys know me. I don't need to introduce myself, but I would love for the TSTM team to introduce themselves. Can you guys just tell us just your names and what program you work out of? Because you guys are consultants for Propel and you also have other jobs.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go first. I'm Rebecca Sherry, and I am a professional learning coordinator for Propel. And also, this is our TSTM Essentials team, and that's one of the projects that I work on heavily for Propel.
And I'm Mariah Lira. I full-time work at Clovis Community College as the ESL instructional coordinator, but I also work on the NMDELT team and the TSTM team as a senior consultant, and I've been doing this since 2020.
Hi, my name is Nina Baragura. I teach at Taos Education and Career Center at UNM Taos. So that is our adult ed program at UNM Taos. I teach HSE classes in language arts and science and a little bit of social studies kind of wrapped into that. I also am the adult ed instructor in the IET courses for healthcare. So CNA and EMTB currently, and possibly more in the future. And yeah, I'm a consultant as part of the TSTM Essentials team.
Wow, man, they have you teaching a lot. That is so cool. That's a lot of different just sort of teaching just in this group already. This is so exciting. Thank you guys, and thank you for being here. Just as a reminder, Nina was our guest on our IET episode where Jamie and I drove up to Taos to check out the IET class, or one of them she teaches. And Rebecca has been on the show a couple of times talking about different topics. We've talked about ESL and ethics. And we also talked about learning with podcasts, which was a kind of fun meta kind of study about how we learned from other podcasts. And Mariah, it's the first time to have you here. We're so glad to have you. All of you. Thank you guys for coming.
Yes.
So to get things started, to back up a little bit, what is TSTM? We've heard that, in the field sometimes. I've definitely heard it from directors of like, we got to make sure our teachers know TSTM, make sure they go to training, make sure they go to you guys, right? But can you guys tell us, just break it down. What is TSTM?
So TSTM stands for Teaching Skills That Matter. And this started as a national initiative from AIR, which is American Institutes for Research. They run a lot of our national level professional development. And what they focused on with this is it's really, I think of it as a curriculum training primarily. And what we're looking at is skills that are really important for both classroom use for adult learners and also like out in the world. And so there's a big focus on what we call the 9 central skills. And then they identified 5 key topics that are very important for our learners to have a good grasp of, a good understanding of. And what's interesting about these topics is that they are not specifically topic items on the HSE exam, the GED exam, or something like that. So they include things like digital literacy. Okay. And then the third area is the teaching approaches. And so they identified 3 teaching approaches that are particularly engaging for adult learners and really help to convey the content that we want our learners to get in a relevant and meaningful way. And I don't know if my fellow team members want to add anything.
That sounded good to me.
Yeah, you always do such a good job of like explaining what TSTM is, because it is really a huge project, and to get it so concise, that's exactly what it is.
That's it. Conciseness is a talent. I don't know if conciseness is a word, but it is a talent. I think you put that really well, Rebecca. Thank you. So TSTM is the national initiative. TSTM Essentials is something that you guys kind of been working on. So changing it slightly to kind of sort of benefit the field. Could you tell us like what is TSTM Essentials specifically?
So just kind of like as a background, TSTM was, and I know Rebecca kind of already talked about it, but TSTM really had those three components of essential skills, the key topics or the content areas, and then the approaches that work the best. So in the past, when we did the initiative, it was very, very long. I don't remember if it was like 6 or 9 months, but it was a long cohort where we did all of this. And so when we came back and we started to present it to the field, it was at first like a 3 to 4 month cohort where we were doing a lot of different things. And because there was so much content, we really were trying to push it into that 4-month or that 3-month time frame. And the feedback we got was that it wasn't really effective. And the way we were approaching it was the way that we were instructed, which was like looking at the toolkit, which for a lot of people, and the biggest feedback that we got was that it was just a little too advanced. It was very difficult to adapt to lower levels. And our focus was definitely on that toolkit. Of course, the other skills that were in there and the other components, but we really were focusing on like the toolkit, and the toolkit is a great resource, but we knew something had to change because that was a common thread among the feedback that we got was it was just too overwhelming. So what we did is we kind of came back together, we regrouped this last spring, and we said, what do we want to do here? How can we make it more accessible to instructors in a way that is effective, impactful, but very concise, very short, because that's what instructors are looking for. There are very few, and especially in our field, and as a coordinator myself, I see it all the time where we have that high turnover. So sometimes we don't have instructors who can stay here for 3 to 4 months, or the other obligations get in the way. And so we wanted to make it, instead of 3 or 4 months, we wanted to change it to a 4-week model where we come in and we really focus on workshops based on one component. And so everyone is working on the workshop and it's much more structured. There was so much that when you go and you look at the TSTM curriculum that was already developed, there is so much that we can do. But I think we have a better approach of like giving it little pieces at a time. So that way each individual can get a specific amount, really targeted, really in-depth component, like just one aspect. So we can really hone in on it and bring something incredible out, because we were doing really good. I felt like giving them the top layer, just skimming the top of the milk, so to speak, is we were showing a whole bunch of different ideas, but never got to the heart of it, never got to the deep portion where it was transformative. And I think that's what we're aiming for here. And what I know I'm real excited to see how this turns out, is that transformation of really honing in on one topic and one component of it, one skill, and exploring it to its fullest potential. And that's what TSTM Essentials is coming around to be.
Okay, I like that. I've heard of this kind of term or expression, which is the knowing what's the difference between the need to know and the nice to know, right? And sometimes as educators, we get so much into the content, we kind of lose our focus on like, what are people walking away from? And I think, I don't want to speak for other people. I definitely felt that way as an educator, of just like, I focus so much like when, in teaching in classes, focusing so much on making sure my students are exposed to this content, but then we kind of get lost in like, then what does that mean for them in the long run? Did they learn enough? And then I think the same could be said for practitioners too. It's something I've been reflecting on, especially like with the amount of conferences I go to for this job is crazy. But it's like, okay, we're learning all this cool new stuff, but now what? What do we do with it? And I think honing in and kind of, trimming a little bit. You're not transformed being bombarded by information, right? We're transformed as in something changes. What does that mean in terms of this context transformational learning? Is that you are transformed by the content. As in what happens to this, whatever you're learning, it changes your practice, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. So I love that you're using that term. Like, we want this professional learning to be transformative. And that's really excellent. So I know you kind of went in a few different directions, Mariah, and you gave us so much. Can we just go over again, just like what the new structure, just one more time? I just want to make sure that it's clear. Like, because we went from like the multiple month cohort to a much shorter one, right? Which is the workshops. Can you guys just go over that just one more time?
I can, explain part of it. So one big change is that we are taking, so there's 3 approaches those are part of the TSTM like methodology or whatever you want to call it. And so we're introducing and like actually doing the training on the approaches differently from how we were before. So for example, in the spring, was it the spring? I think it was called the Teachers Institute. And I know like the name's different now, but when it was called Teachers Institute in Albuquerque, we did a workshop that was focused on one of the approaches. And we're going to do another one soon, like in the fall, as like an in-person workshop. So that way the participants can attend the in-person workshop and have like an experiential learning experience of that approach. And it's going to be like one at a time. And we're putting like more focus on the approaches because there's just so much to cover. There's the topics, there's the essential skills, and there's the approaches. And personally, I think the approaches are the easiest to immediately apply to one's instruction. At least that's how I feel about it. And so like that's one of the biggest changes is doing in-person workshops for an approach. So the one that we did in the spring of the Teachers Institute, I think was really fun. It was kind of meta because it was teaching problem-based approach. And then we had the participants experience that themselves as the learners in a problem-based experience, like lesson. So they actually got to do it as learners, and then we could use that as like a demonstration of like, you just experienced a problem-based activity or lesson. So this is one way that we're helping you like learn what it is. And then the next one's going to be project-based. So that's one of the bigger differences. And it's just so hard to try to communicate and help participants learn this information when we're trying to cram in so much information in like virtual online trainings where we're on the computer for several hours. So I like the way we did this. And like Mariah was saying, we did this because we were incorporating the feedback that we got from people. And it's called Essentials now because we're kind of paring it down to the essentials instead of trying to like cover every single thing the same amount. We're just kind of paring it down a little bit. So
wow, thank you. You guys gave me just a good overview. So for clarification, what is the difference between problem-based learning and project-based learning?
You have to come to the workshop, Nadia. Like that's
There you go.
okay. That's a really, really great question. And it is actually something that we do answer in the workshops because what we're talking about there is project-based learning is generally conducted in sort of like team setting. So the students are collaborating together. It's harder to implement project-based learning on an individual basis. So they're collaborating together and there's a product when they finish and they present that product to an audience. So the product might be a presentation or it might be they built something. I mean, there's a variety of ways that this could go. Problem-based learning is focusing more on you offer the students a problem. And Nina has used problem-based learning a bunch in her classes, and I have as well in mine, where you put something out to the students that's like a real world problem, like one that I've addressed with my students in the ESL early childhood program is the question of how schools are funded. And so like they have to investigate like a funding problem at the school and how could that be resolved. And in the process, then they learn about how schools are funded in the United States, which is a really important lesson for people who are planning future careers in the school system. Does that make sense, Nadia?
That makes a ton of sense. And also it is in line with adult learning theory, right? Which is making the learning applicable. And that also sparks interest and engagement. So thank you. Yeah, that was very succinct. Thank you guys. So again, like I said, we touched on this a little bit. Why was TSTM Essentials developed? So yeah, so we did touch on that. So actually, I want to shift a little bit because we already covered this, but I want to ask you guys just you talked about the feedback, and I was wondering if you can talk about that. Like what is the kind of feedback and how did you collect this? And the reason why I ask is because needs assessment is a form of evaluation, and it's really important. Especially, we don't always get that opportunity to either, is to like really get this information and what does the audience get out of it, right? What are they getting out of what we're doing? And if do we need to modify to better suit our audience? So again, my question is, you went into why TSTM Essentials was developed. I'll ask, what did you guys do in terms of needs assessment?
So with the needs assessment, we've done evaluation with every cohort training that we've offered. So those cohorts were our longer training, and the evaluation that we got and some of the follow-up that we had with some of the participants, because we were doing individual coaching with them too. And so we could also get feedback in that sense, like people would talk about it. And as Mariah mentioned earlier, and I would love if she wants to expand on this too, the key takeaways were that a semester-long cohort was really long for people. Partly people told us that, and partly we noticed it in the number of people who were unable to complete the entire semester cohort. The other thing that we noticed was that the toolkit, as Mariah said, was challenging for people to implement lessons. So the toolkit lessons are lessons that were created by the National TSTM project. And people, particularly our ESL instructors and particularly our instructors at lower levels, found it challenging to adapt some of the materials to fit their classes. And there was a lot of emphasis in the original cohort training that you had to teach out a lesson and it was an observation. And so that was kind of like your implementation phase. And what we've tried to do is to offer some different options for the implementation phase now. So one, you practice the skill in the workshop, that's probably going to be like an hour long workshop. And then two, if you're interested, you have the option to continue with instructional coaching over the next couple of weeks where you're going to implement that strategy in your classroom and get feedback on that. So it's just a much, much shorter thing based on that participant feedback. But Mariah, if you want to add anything more about the participant feedback and especially about what people liked about the TSTM.
Yeah, of course. I think kind of going back to what you had referred to, Nadia, is, separating the need to know versus what is interesting to know, that kind of concept. And I know we did focus a lot on the feedback that we were given and evaluations, but also it was just a lot of verbal, hearing people talk about it. And I think it was really exciting when Nina jumped on board and we were starting to change some of the things. And Nina was like, wow, this is so different from when I participated in it. And just hearing, especially Nina's feedback. And I think a lot of it comes from the participants themselves, but I know hearing some of the feedback that I don't think Nina really intended to give us on the course, like just through conversation, it was very apparent that there were certain things that were very interesting. And if you have the time to really dive into it, it's great material. Not saying that it's not important or it's not relevant. It definitely is, but it's just so overwhelming me because the toolkit itself was, we got 2 big old binders of information that they mailed to us. The toolkit, resources, like everything that was in there is big old binders. And so, yeah, I can understand if you're going to go through every single piece, that's why it would take so long. And so even with us trying to put all of this information into 4 months rather than, I don't even remember if it was 6 or 9 months. I know it was a really long time during COVID when we did the national cohort, and it was very long, very intensive, but us trying to get all of that information and squash it down into a smaller time frame, even though we had successfully done smaller time frame, we were still putting in too much content. And so the idea of just trying to adapt and change it again to make it accessible and relevant to instructors and meet them on a different level, because we saw it, and Nadia, you said earlier, is having to travel and all of this stuff, and instructors have to worry about being in their classes, prepping for their classes, making sure they get professional development. And if we're really trying to target and help as many practitioners as we can, really we came down to it's not ideal. It's not really realistic unless it's someone who has a full-time job and is able to really, really put in all of those time, energy, resources into maintaining it. And that's not what we see in adult education. We don't see a whole lot of full-time practitioners that are here. We see a lot of part-time, and that part-time work usually is just within their part-time requirements. So we really want to make sure that all instructors are able to access this material without feeling overwhelmed or boggled down.
That is so well put from all of you. Thank you. I really like this emphasis on like really hearing from practitioners. Like, one of the things that I've seen so much in adult ed are surveys, and surveys are beneficial and they are a form of, getting feedback. But what I've also noticed is sometimes I get more information talking to someone for 5 minutes than I do reading 100 surveys. And there's something, and that's assuming 100 people even fill it out. Sometimes we don't get that, but really just listening to participants. And I'm sure maybe it didn't, I'm sure they also felt valued in that you were asking them questions, you were hearing what they were saying about the cohort, and you guys took what they were saying and implemented. That's amazing, because they're your audience. They're the people that know the best of what you're of like how this affects them. And so I really like that. It is informal conversations, but they are almost.
Is it like qualitative versus quantitative, sort of?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's exactly it, but
not exactly, but I know what you're saying. It's like, because they're kind, because they're sort of like interviews, but not really, because you guys are just informally talking. But it really does provide this really rich information. You just got to know what you're doing, and you guys clearly do. I also just really appreciate that thought too, again, of putting the learner first, which is recognize they don't have that time, which is great. They don't have that time, and we want to serve them to the best of their ability. That was really, really great. Thank you. So
can I add one more thing?
Yes, please.
One thing that I really like about, like, this has to do with what we're saying right now, and what I like about how we're doing TSTM Essentials is that I feel the best about like any kind of professional development when I feel like I can take something that I can immediately apply. Like, I love when I go to conference sessions and they're like, here are the materials, scan the QR code, you can use this tomorrow in your class. Like, I love that. And so I think with the way we're doing TSTM Essentials, because it is the essentials, I think it's going to be easier for our practitioners to immediately apply what they're learning. And I mean, they were doing that before, and that was kind of the purpose of like coaching and having them try out what they're learning. But I think having it be more just the essentials and more pared down, I think will kind of reduce like I don't know if cognitive load is the right word, but like the amount of information that they might feel like they need to incorporate, like just kind of focusing on the essentials, because like we all know that that's like kind of how our brain works anyway, is like, learning things in chunks and like simplifying it so that you can go deeper into each instead of trying to like cover so many different things. So I think maybe how we're doing essentials now will help instructors make what they're learning more immediately applicable to their teaching.
Yeah. From what you guys are saying, I think so too. Absolutely. Does anyone else have anything to say before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I wanted to add just one really quick thing, Nadia. And partly this is a shout out to my amazing team, Mariah and Nina. But what you see in the way that we've reformatted Essentials is that you as an audience, as the participant, will experience the kind of thing in the workshop that would happen if you do this strategy with your learners in the classroom. And when it was presented to us, and granted, we did do the training during COVID, there was a lot of reading about what is this technique or what is that skill or something like that. And we have changed that from being a reading load to a try it out load, because we really want you to have that sense and that takeaway. And Nina and Mariah have given us some incredibly creative ideas to make it very fun for our participants.
Well put. Just to add, I just love that you guys have a coaching component too, because that's such a great idea of not just like, here's how you do something, this is something you work on, but we're going to continue a little bit with this relationship. It's really wonderful.
This interview will continue on the next part of this episode. Thank you for listening to the NMEA podcast. Connect with Adult Ed, the NMEA podcast, is a project of the Propel Professional Learning System and is funded by the New Mexico Higher Education Department's Adult Education Division. Thank you for listening.